Resuming debate, reprise des débats, l'honorable député de Pierrefonds-Dollard.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds-Dollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The NDP supports criminals. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that because that's what the members opposite keep repeating. It's an arrogant argument, a demagogic one, and I think it's because we take crime to heart that we are opposed to Bill C-10 in its current form. If one member in this House believes that I myself want to help criminals and encourage sexual attacks on children, then he needs to stand up and say it to me. Tell me directly. Because the title of this very bill is ridiculous. Keeping our streets and communities safe. Nothing indicates that harsher sentences will make our streets safer. Now, I'd like to talk about the report of the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights,
qui rapporte notamment la
which addresses the seriousness of dangers faced by children. This report states that the majority of children who experience sexual abuse are attacked by people they know, people who are part of their environment, people they know. And there are some solutions put forth to fight sexual offenses against children. And it says in this report that if we were to help children to denounce their aggressors, that could put an earlier end to the nightmare they're living. And it would help to prevent other crimes, sexual crimes against children as well. Now, you would be surprised to hear that we're not talking about mandatory minimum sentences in this case. This report talks about education, about awareness that can promote self-esteem among children, to help them to have the communications tools they need. There's also mention of access to teachers, to coaches, to people who are around the children in their environment, who can listen to children. Now, there's also mention made of access to services available to a child that can help a child to find his or her voice, and services before as well as services afterwards. Because after denouncing someone, the child and the family need support to help rebuild the child's confidence, to help the child. So these are some tools that could warrant the title of making our streets and communities safer. And there again, this report doesn't talk about mandatory minimum sentences. Now, there are a host of examples that I could use to emphasize the importance of prevention and assistance for children, measures that would be much more effective than mandatory minimum sentences. I'd also like to quote a strategy in an article from the Canadian Council for Social Development, which talks about preventing crime through social development. Now, what's that all about, Mr. Speaker? Well, according to the Council, it would be a more effective and less costly way of preventing crime. It would be early intervention in order to prevent crime. Now, there are risk factors. What can encourage someone to become a criminal or a victim? And there again, surprise, no one talks about mandatory minimum sentences. People don't start by thinking, well, will I get X number of years? No. These factors are drug and substance abuse, dropping out of school, mistreatment, low self-esteem. And those are the kinds of problems, among others, that need to be dealt with in order to prevent crime. and to make streets and safer and communities safer. Now, if we look at Bill C-10 on the whole, it's an omnibus bill that brings together issues that are very diversified. There is mention of victims of terrorism to take legal action. There are mandatory minimum sentences, electronic monitoring, codification of victims, rehabilitation, and record suspensions as opposed to pardons, criminal justice system for young people, working permits for foreign nationals, etc. So all of these issues are extremely important. They warrant our attention, but they're all lumped together in a single bill, which has to be dealt with all at once. So we don't have an opportunity to debate it at great length. And what about the experts who have been working in these areas, who are experts, but who can't have an opportunity, don't have an opportunity to give their views to the government which will make a decision. And so the government will not have listened to them. Now, going back to experts who appeared before the Justice Committee, I have some examples here of people who appeared on October 18th. Mr. Pardy, Vice President of the Criminal Law Association at the Canadian Bar Association, who says that with this bill, a flawed approach is being adopted for dealing with offenders under the criminal justice system. Once they are from the arrest right up until their treatment in the correctional services and their reintegration. So another expert, Mr. Jackson, who is a member of the National Section of the Criminal Law Section, again at the Canadian Bar Association, who says that this track record doesn't take into account the 150 years of experience at correctional service. It doesn't pay any attention to recommendations put forth previously or to the Royal Commission. This is a 200-page document, and it doesn't refer to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, nor does it refer to Supreme Court decisions. It makes no mention of many of these issues, but this is what was used to prepare the amendments that you are dealing with and that you will need to hear witnesses on. So the witnesses who have appeared before the committee were not all in favor of what is contained in this bill. Mr. Tardy said he was very disappointed to only have 5 minutes before the committee. Imagine only 5 minutes to have an opportunity to deal with such an important bill. And Mr. Tardy, I have to unfortunately tell you that 5 minutes or 5 hours doesn't make a difference because the government simply wouldn't have listened in either case.
In fact, today there are 88 amendments, which is a significant number of amendments. What work was done in committee, what real sense of having been listened to is there? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. In conclusion, this government boasts about listening to families, and that's commendable. In fact, listening to Canadians is important, and we must react. Don't understand our justice system. Why don't we better explain it to them? They're frustrated. They're asking for justice because they feel that criminals are not in prison long enough. Is it about vengeance, pain and suffering of the families? And perhaps we need to help them in a different way than giving them, than telling them they're right and instead imposing mandatory minimum sentences. We can also listen to the experts, Mr. Speaker, who have a lot of things to say about this. For example, CALEX, which is known for fighting violence against women and domestic violence, says that they oppose the spirit of the bill because it opens the door to more repression, and repression does not really give the victims real power, Mr. Speaker. So let's listen to the experts, these people on the ground who on a daily basis are dealing with these issues of violence and unsafe streets. Let's really talk about the issues in order to come up with a bill that is more respectful of the real demands of all Canadians. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, last Sunday, the Canadian press obtained a internal Department of Justice report under access to information. This internal report by the Federal Justice Department raised doubts about the efficiency of the imposition of harsher sentences. To quote the author of the study, André Solecki, and I quote, "There is no proof to show that the imposition of a longer sentence will impact a repeat offender and prevent them from repeat offending." So the Conservative government is not either reading its own internal reports, or it is setting aside all the reports that are in opposition with what it wants to respect its own ideology, and is not taking into consideration the opinion of experts, which talks about rehabilitation instead of harsher sentences. The member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. I want to thank my colleague for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord for the example that he has brought forward of studies of experts who have instead asked the government to focus on prevention. I have a number of others. I talked about Calix. I talked about other reports. I could talk about studies with regard to meta-analyses which show that incarceration does not reduce the number of repeat offenses committed. I could also talk about, I'm looking for the name, the Institute for the Prevention of Crime at the University of Ottawa, which states that a number of policies and prevention practices have proven effective in fighting against crime and victimization and to improve the well-being of individuals. So we have tons of examples of people who tell us that this bill is not going in the right direction. Questions and comments?
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Chambly-Bourgeois. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a term that I greatly appreciated in the speech, the commendable speech given by my colleague, and that was the term risk factors. And I think it's something very interesting because the idea here is that we are all for reducing crime, particularly violent crime, as my colleague said so well. At the same time, there are different approaches. Often we hear quoted from the Minister of Justice studies that say that Quebecers are for harsher sentences, but there is a nuance to be made to the extent that this doesn't necessarily mean that we support the approach taken in C-10 because there are a number of problems. In fact, I'd like my colleague to comment on the fact that we're talking about risk factors, we're talking about risks to our society, health and education and others. So we're not targeting these areas to reduce crime, but we'll force provinces as well to pay for the costs associated with this approach. I'd like her to talk about this. The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Thank you. To comment on this, I would like to say that I was a teacher at elementary school, and I want to say that if each time a teacher sees a child do something that they don't like and they make them copy something out or they punish them, perhaps that won't resolve the problem in the long run in the classrooms. Instead, we're talking about teaching young children the social skills they need, the study skills they need, how to express their frustration. And so, yes, repression is not the only means, and above all, it is not the means that has been proven as the most effective to date. So that is the comment that I would offer to my colleague. Thank you.